Hello again, BookTube. Books with Banks back again with another video today. A quick insert at the beginning of this Song of Ice and Fire hot take video. I should say before I get started here that this is a spoiler video. Pretty light spoilers, but I will say it's a spoiler video for I'll say the first 5 or 6 seasons of the Game of Thrones show and all of the written material of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. Enjoy. Sorry, my hair looks a little crazy, but that's okay. That kind of fits, I think, because what I'm talking about today, some of you might think it's a little bit crazy. And I'm not gonna lie, part of the joy I'll derive from this is that I know what I'm about to talk about is a little bit contentious. So if you're interested in hearing one of my hottest of hot takes, please strap in, and here we go. So I've talked about Malazan, I've talked about series I'm going to read. I haven't talked about one of the biggest main series that got me into fantasy, and that would be the Song of Ice and Fire series. I've got them lined up back here. Just the main 5 novels that have been released so far, and then the mass market of Fire and Blood. I love mass market editions, but I'll do a whole video about why I like mass market so much later. Anyway, I haven't read, I should mention before I get too far into this, I haven't read the short, or the novellas and the other stuff. This is the extent of what I've read, and I've read some of A World of Ice and Fire. So today I'm going to talk about which of these books is my favorite. And if maybe I've already forecasted this a little bit too much, that it's going to be controversial. So if you think I'm going to pick the craziest choice to be my favorite, you might be right. My favorite novel in George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series, Game of Thrones is based on, is in fact book 4, A Feast for Crows. Now, right off the bat, I need to say, I get why people aren't the biggest fan of this. A lot of the characters that everybody falls in love with in the series don't necessarily feature that strongly in this one. In fact, my brother, who had read the series before I had, and he actually got me into the TV show and then into the series, more on that in a little bit, but he had told me kind of what the character divide and breakdown was for this book and the 5th. For those of you who haven't read the books, basically books 1, 2, and 3 go straight through and tell a pretty cohesive storyline. And then book 4 and 5 split up the cast. So they happen for the most part concurrently with one another, and book 5 gets a lot of the big hitters like Tyrion, Dany, Jon. This book gets characters like Brienne. This is also our first Cersei point of view chapters. There's some Jaime in here. There are also a ton of new Greyjoy and Martell characters in this book. Now, a bit of context on when I got into the series that might help some who are scratching their head a little bit to understand why this might be my favorite, is that I got into this around the time that season 3 of the show was finishing up. My brother had watched, or he watched like a couple episodes, I think, of season 1, and then decided no, he was going to read the book first and then watch the corresponding season. So he did that with the first 3 seasons and then read books 4 and 5. And then the summer before we both went to college, like a week or 2 before we left, he finally, after a lot of kind of asking and really hoping that I would get into it, he finally got me to sit down and binge through basically seasons 1 and 2 of the show in one weekend, and then over the course of the next week we watched season 3. So I was pretty hooked from that point, and I decided, okay, this is as good a time as any. I'll be in college. Who knows what my social life's going to be like? Who knows how much time I'm going to have to read? But my brother has all these books. I'll take them to school with me, and I'll start reading them. So, so I started to read the series, and I enjoyed it. Missing a few of those extra scenes you get in the show, where like they would take like a Varys and Littlefinger conversation and actually show it to us in season 1 or 2, whereas in the books you really only get 8, 9, 10, or however many point of view perspectives that George R. R. Martin's giving you. So the show, I could see some of the benefits to the show, but I also just really enjoyed reading George his writing style. I was hooked, but I was pretty much thinking, okay, I like the show about as much as I like the books. So then around winter break was when I got about halfway through book 3, Storm of Swords, and again, for those of you who might like just be fans of the show or just fans of the book, whichever way, or maybe you're looking to get into the series, book 3, season 1 is book 1, season 2 is book 2, book 3 gets 2 seasons. The first half, a little more than the first half, is season 3, and then season 4 finishes up all of the amazing climactic things that happen at the end of book 3. By the way, I'm not too crazy. That is definitely my close second favorite of the series. From what I understand, that's a much more popular take, to have that ranked so high, book 3. But because at this point season 4 hadn't come out yet, I didn't know how that book ended, or I didn't know what those climactic events were going to be. So around winter 20, I guess this would be 2013, going into 2014, season 4 is ramping up. It's gonna premiere in I believe the coming spring, and I've read all of the books that I'm familiar with from what I've seen in the show. Finally, I get to the end of book 3, and I am blown away. It's so much more fun, I find, reading Martin's words and reading the books first, without knowing what happens and how it's kind of reworked in some cases and presented on HBO. So I loved getting to the end of the 3rd book and having all of this fresh material that I was consuming by reading as opposed to watching. And so then this book, just really mostly because of the time that I got into the series, all the books that were out at that time, this book had the massive benefit for me of being the first whole novel that there wasn't any show content adapting any of it. In fact, because of how the show chose to handle a few of the side storylines, I'd say there's still not a lot of show content out there that adapts much of this book. And a lot of those things that aren't adapted are things like a lot of the Greyjoy character storylines, but especially the Martell storyline and everything going on in Dorne. Again, for those of you who might just be fans of the show, I would understand someone who watched the show not really caring too much for the Dornish area or the Dornish cast of characters, other than maybe what's his name, the Viper, Oberyn Martell, who he's got that awesome duel with the Mountain at the end of book 3. But in this book, we're introduced to such fascinating characters that don't even make it into the show, really. The Sand Snakes do. And they're okay in here. They're fine, whatever. But Ariana Martell is so interesting here. Even in book 5, which might be one of my less favorite of the series, you get Quentin Martell, who's really, really interesting. I think Doran Martell is shown to be such a smart and capable politician and kind of schemer, player of the game, and that starts here in this book. And I think it's so fascinating, but a lot of these side kind of smaller stories just don't get highlighted in the show, or they get totally overhauled to be a little less significant so that the show can focus on those bigger, more important characters like Tyrion and Jon and Dany. But That being said, while those characters all get their time to shine in the fifth book, I do want to talk about who I'd consider probably the two main characters of this book. I mentioned them briefly before, but that's Cersei Lannister and, or Baratheon, but Cersei Lannister and Brienne of Tarth. They, I think, both prove, or Martin proves in this book, that he can write these two characters so well, and so compellingly, that while one stays pretty much stationary in a city, there's this amazing political intrigue plot, and this is like everything with the High Sparrow and everything with what's going on with Marjorie versus Cersei, that whole thing. It's so much more intriguing, I think, in the book, and I was on the edge of my seat reading every Cersei chapter, and she's just such a unique character to read the point of view of. For as much as people talk about this being a series with kind of gray or unsure, like moral, or characters with unsure moral compasses, I do think at the end of the day, a lot of times people's favorites and where the series kind of heads and winds up, people root for, like, the Jon Snow, who's pretty much the hero character, and Tyrion Lannister, who's pretty much the underdog. He's a little more morally complex. And Daenerys Targaryen, she's a little complex as well. But I think Cersei, and Martin writing from her point of view, kind of forcing us to sit in her mindset, which, to be sure, is a pretty... it's off. It's a little twisted. I think that is... when I had heard that this series was about morally complex characters, this is the point of view. Cersei in Feast for Crows is the point of view that I was hoping to get more of, and this book has a ton of it. Also, I do want to also talk about Brienne of Tarth, and her adventure, I think, is, while it's a little slower in the books than it is in the show, you know, her going off with Podrick Payne to look for the Stark girls, that quest gets started here, and it's interesting, but there's a lot more kind of just her considering her place in the world, and I find her such an interesting character, a knight in this medieval setting, very sexist medieval setting, which is a fairly accurate and horrible, but accurate reflection of, pretty realistic reflection of, I'm guessing, what it would have been like to be a knight, like Brienne, in the, 1300s, 1400s, maybe a little before that, in Europe. But yeah, so I just love that quest storyline. It's such a dark and upsetting kind of quest, and the twists and turns that her story takes are just unfortunate, and you're like, oh no, why are this group of people capturing her? I mean, I understand, but why did they have to do that? And why... It can be frustrating, but it's like a good kind of frustrating. It's the frustration that keeps you reading, that keeps you wanting to make sure they get out of it. Makes you want to find out how successful the heroic knight is on her quest to save the princess. And it's these sorts of things that are like a one-sentence description could sound like any fantasy story. But then when you have Brienne of Tarth as the character at the center of it, or when you have Cersei Lannister as the character at the center of it, or Princess in the Tower, Ariana Martell, at the center of it, I guess that's a little bit more Dance with Dragons as well, the fifth book. When you have these really unique and well-written, well-drawn characters at the center of these stories, that's where Martin really shines, and where he really shines a light on the grittiness and the sexism of this time period, and the time period depicted here is sort of referencing in our own history. So hopefully that wasn't too rambly, too long-winded, but those are some of the reasons I love A Feast for Crows, Book 4 of A Song of Ice and Fire. Those are some of the reasons why it's my favorite book. Again, not sure if it's the best written. I'm not sure if I would like it this much if I had to wait the 5 years for this to come out and then the 6 for the next to come out. I'm not sure if I would like it this much if I had watched the whole show first, or if I had read all of the other books, or the first 3 books before ever watching the show. I'm not sure how all that impacted my critical reception of this, but I do think those factors factor in, or those are important things to consider. But there you go. That's one of my hottest takes. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And if you disagree strongly, or if you are like me and maybe don't rank this first, but maybe you rank it really high still, or really are drawn to some of the elements that I covered here, please comment below. I'd love to hear from the community. Thank you so much. Bye.